So this nerdy kid gets hit by some alien parasite and turns into a superhero. He's gotta use these new powers to protect Earth from an alien threat. Hey guys, I'm Movie Cut and today we're recapping the 2019 series YolkMan. So, buckle up, it's recap time. Jan is this high school kid who's totally into his best friend Nina, but he's never been brave enough to tell her. One day, during lunch, he's about to confess his love for her, but then he finds out she's planning to move to the States for a couple of years. Meanwhile, this alien life form invades a hospital room, attacking a patient. A nurse also gets hit and is taken out. Jan's day gets even worse when he runs into Nina's ex, Kyle, in the bathroom and wants to punch him after he disses Nina, but he just can't do it. That afternoon, feeling sick, Jan passes out in the street and ends up in the hospital. There, the docs tell him he's got a tumor spreading fast. This news just shocks him. He's got like only 3 months to live. That night, he tries to distract himself by playing games with friends, not knowing that an alien parasite has sneaked into his drink. After drinking it, Jan feels worse and heads to bed, unaware that an alien has just entered his body. While sleeping, Jan starts writhing as the creature inside him gets online, learning all about humans. The next morning, Jan freaks out as he realizes he's not the only one controlling his body. He searches online for parasites and spots a wound on his chest, concluding he's been infected. Suddenly, this woman Grace calls him about his symptoms and asks to run some tests, but Jan decides to try and get rid of it himself, attacking himself with a knife. While fighting his own body, the patient from the hospital, infected by the alien, emerges from a river and wanders the streets looking for Yolk, the parasite. After a crazy night trying to remove Yolk, Jan finally sees it leave on its own and realizes their nervous systems are connected. Yolk, the yellow alien, then explains they're stuck together now. One gets hurt, so does the other. Realizing Yolk can cure his tumor, Jan lets it remerge with him, and it zaps all his cancer cells. After the cure, Yolk's drained and Jan needs to eat a lot to recover their energy. Meanwhile, Ben returns home and impresses his wife with his new healthy look. Cops go to the hospital, find the nurse Yolk took out, and start investigating. The next day, Jan notices he's stronger and Yolk admits it upgraded him with superhuman abilities. But Jan's gotta keep it a secret, cause humans can't know about Yolk. At school, Jan's heart races seeing Nina, which makes Yolk think they're in danger, but Jan explains he's just nervous because Nina means the world to him. Now with powers, Jan confronts Kyle, warns him to leave Nina alone. When Kyle doesn't listen, Jan intimidates him, showing off his strength. That night, instead of taking out his wife, Ben uses a stinger from his hand to control her. Cops come by, but she covers for Ben, and they leave without a scratch. At school lunch, Jan's wolfing down loads of food, worrying his friend. Then Nina shows up, shares she lost her scholarship cause of Kyle's family, meaning she can't move to the States. Jan realizes it's his fault for threatening Kyle. Furious, he confronts Kyle again, challenges him to a tennis match. If Jan wins, Kyle's gotta ask his folks to keep sponsoring Nina. It's a doubles match, so Jan teams up with his friend Stan, who's terrible at tennis. Despite being a great player, Jan's losing cause of Stan. But to win, he lets Yolk take over. Detecting Yolk, Ben and Michelle head over. After a lot of back and forth, Jan and Yolk manage to win the match, thanks to Yolk's help. Grace shows up, claiming to be part of the tennis club, and pulls Jan aside for a chat. But when they're alone, Jan recognizes her voice and remembers she's the one who called him earlier. Grace reveals why she's really there and hands him her card so he can reach out to her. That night, on his way home, Kyle runs into Ben on the street and ends up being another puppet in the Matrix. The next day, during a math test, Jan nails the questions with Yolk's help and is the first to hand in his paper. He even slips some answers to his friends, and they all pass. That day, Jan asks Nina out and decides to confess his feelings, but he's super nervous, so Yolk sends some endorphins to Jan's brain to calm him down. However, when he sees Nina, the nerves kick in again, and he needs Yolk's help to make his move. When Yolk takes over, Ben detects him again and Michelle starts to chase after him. Suddenly, Nina's friends arrive at the diner, and Jan gets embarrassed and decides to leave. It's late when Jan walks home alone and runs into Kyle, who attacks him from behind. Not knowing Jan is under a parasite's control, Jan gets beaten up until Yolk realizes something's wrong. After noticing a scar on Kyle's neck, Yolk realizes he's been infected by another of his species. Jan lets Yolk take over to fight the enemy. The creature that infected Kyle's brain is called Matrix, and Yolk needs to take it out before other hosts show up. After a strategic takedown, Jan feels guilty for being responsible for the death, but Yolk claims Kyle was gone the moment Matrix infected him. Jan removes the parasite from Kyle's neck, and Yolk devours it, gaining a lot of energy. After the meal, the creature decides to nap, but Michelle shows up right after. Being alone in this duel, Jan gets beaten up and tries to fight back, but the parasite inside Michelle makes her much stronger than him. So, Jan ends up being captured and is about to be taken out when Grace shows up and knocks Michelle down with a shot. After Jan gets in her car, she speeds off and takes him home. At home, he finds Stan, who's seen Jan's medical report. Stan's shocked to know Jan's only got 3 months to live, so Jan decides to tell him the truth. When Stan learns about yolk, he asks to touch it, and Nina catches them on the rooftop. From her angle, she thinks Jan and Stan are dating and is shocked. After revealing his secret, Jan asks Stan to promise not to tell anyone about the alien. But as soon as Jan leaves, Stan starts spreading the news. The next morning, the rumors everywhere, and Candy shows up at Jan's apartment for an interview. However, Jan denies everything Stan said and kicks her out. Then yolk attacks Jan, planning to take him out to keep its existence a secret. In an attempt to save his best friend, Jan grabs a knife and threatens to cut his own neck, knowing if he dies, the alien dies too. At that moment, yolk leaves Jan's body and agrees to live by his rules, or they'll both die together. Hours later, the police find Kyle and conclude the criminal is the same person who attacked the nurse. When Ben learns he's lost one of his allies, he goes after new hosts for Matrix and invades a building to find his victims. After hearing about an attack at the academic center, Jan decides to investigate and uses his powers to enter the building. Unnoticed by Bill, Jan continues his mission to find Matrix. When Ben appears, they start a duel. Ben rips yolk out of Jan's body and tries to destroy it, but when the alien is about to be crushed, Jan attacks his enemy and manages to save it. Then he flees through the window and hides in the crowd. After losing his enemy, yolk reveals that Ben is the main host of Matrix, and the others are just puppets controlled by him. Jan's on the subway when he feels the presence of another alien. Trying to save a young woman in the car, he throws her out of the train before starting a duel. Despite being just a puppet, the man shows great strength and brutally hits January. During the battle, yolk leaves Jan's body to protect him and finds out it's just received an upgrade in abilities. After taking out the man, Jan gets a visit from Michelle and decides to run, knowing using yolk's power will attract other puppets. He manages to lose Michelle in the subway and then returns home, where he finds Ben again. Instead of facing him, yolk orders Jan to run, and he faints after jumping out the window. Yolk leaves his body and hides. Ben appears and stabs Jan in the chest with an iron rod. When the police arrive, they find only Jan's phone. Injured and with nowhere to go, Jan wanders until he finds Stan, who calls Grace for help. Minutes later, she appears and takes Jan to her secret lab, where she conducts experiments on him to study the changes yolk made in his body. During the research, Grace discovers yolk didn't cure Jan's tumor, it just divided to encase the cancer cells, preventing them from spreading. But now that the creature is no longer in Jan's body, the cancer is spreading faster. Since yolk can't survive long alone, Grace believes it's already found a new host, meaning Jan will die soon. He decides to leave the lab and return to his routine. That same day, Grace receives a visit at her lab and captures the alien that came looking for January. Looking in the mirror, Jan sees the cancer spreading faster, realizing his death is approaching. Meanwhile, Grace is experimenting with Mock and believes Jan will return soon. After class, Jan meets Nina, who tells him she lost her scholarship because of something he did. Ashamed and afraid to tell her the truth, Jan runs away. Nina chases after him and hugs him. The next morning, Jan wakes up in Nina's room and leaves before she wakes up. Nina, worried, goes to Stan for help to find January. They head to Grace's lab, where Jan has just arrived and finds yolk trapped in an incubator. Jan accuses yolk of using him, and yolk reveals the only way to cure Jan's cancer is to remove all the cancer cells from his body, which would kill the alien. After being abandoned by yolk, Jan no longer trusts it and refuses to let the parasite back into his body. Outside, Michelle and her army of puppets invade the lab, taking out all the scientists working with Grace. In a fierce battle, Grace manages to take out some of the puppets, but she's wounded. Jan, still sinking with yolk, rushes to help Grace, arriving just in time to save her. Together, they defeat the last puppet. Yolk devours the parasite, completing the sync with January. They discover Michelle is still alive and face her again. Yolk attacks and eliminates Michelle for good. Now that the path is clear, Jan helps Grace and finds out Michelle is still alive. They face her again, and yolk uses its stinger to attack and eliminate her once and for all. As usual, after defeating the host, yolk devours the parasite, gaining energy for the next battle. Their next mission is to eliminate the original Matrix cell, as otherwise, Ben will keep infecting humans and other life forms to turn them into puppets. But before the group can leave the lab, Bill and Patrick show up and take Jan away in handcuffs. On the way, the cops encounter another puppet in the street and crash trying to avoid it. When the car flips, the cops pass out. The puppet drags Jan out of the vehicle and starts attacking him. Jan stands up and, even with his hands cuffed, manages to take down his opponent. He then rescues the cops from the car and finds the keys to unlock the handcuffs. Meanwhile, Nina and the others are on their way to the police station and receive a location from January. When the group meets up, Jan hears a noise from the river, and Yolk reveals that the Matrix is invading Earth. Soon it will awaken and turn all creatures on the planet into living puppets. The only way to stop it is to find and eliminate the alien before it awakens its power. Noticing that the man who attacked Jan is being drawn to Matrix, Stan turns on his phone's GPS and puts it in his jacket. This way, they'll be able to track the original alien host. But when the puppet enters the water, the phone stops working, and Yolk reveals it put one of its cells inside the man to track him. After being treated by paramedics, Bill and Patrick continue searching for Jan, unaware that he and his friends are trying to prevent humanity's extinction. While driving through the city, Nina spots the puppet, and Jan gets out of the car to follow him. After a long chase, the man reaches the Matrix's lair and is taken out by Yolk, which devours another parasite. Ben appears, and Jan has to run as Yolk will take 20 minutes to digest its last meal. During the escape, the cops show up and run over Ben, helping Jan escape and taking him back to the Matrix's secret lair. Reunited with his friends, Jan decides to reveal Yolk's existence to the cops and asks for their help to stop the enemy. However, Bill and Patrick are skeptical until another puppet comes out of hiding, and Jan takes it out. The plan now is to eliminate all the puppets so Jan can reach the Matrix. Nina acts as bait to lure the monsters while her friends, armed outside, wait to take them down. After Grace takes out the first puppet, Nina returns to the cave, and Jan follows to make sure she's safe. Instead of finding Nina, he encounters Ben and heads towards him, intending to take him out. But Ben throws Jan away, revealing he's still stronger than him. When Ben is about to pierce Jan with his stinger, Nina shows up and shocks him with a taser. Ben gets up again, but Grace shoots him to give Nina a chance to escape. Jan stays behind to face his biggest enemy. He lets Yolk take control, and a brutal battle between the two aliens begins. After being hit in the chest, Jan manages to dodge an attack and strikes Ben's neck where his parasite is located. With this move, he wins the battle and takes out Ben. Then, Jan heads to confront the Matrix, finding the monstrous alien clinging to a wall. Yolk starts absorbing the creature's power before it awakens, but can't handle the massive energy. Jan decides to attach a bomb to the Matrix's cocoon and blows it up. Even weakened, the alien escapes it and reinfects Ben. Believing the Matrix is destroyed, Jan stands up from the debris and heads for the exit, only to realize the enemy is still alive. While thinking of a way to finish it off for good, Yolk comes up with a plan to extract the cancer cells from Jan's body and inject them into Ben. This would destroy the parasite from the inside out and cure January. Yolk knows this could be fatal for itself, but decides to risk it, and Jan rushes out of the cave. Seeing Ben emerge, the cops start shooting but end up being attacked. After being electrocuted, the alien is weaker but survives and heads towards Nina and Stan. Jan manages to reach him in time and strikes the creature with his stinger. At this moment, Yolk releases the cancer cells into Ben's body, being devoured by the Matrix and telling Jan to run before he gets infected too. Jan is about to be taken out when Stan uses a power cable to electrocute Ben again, causing him to flee. After the attack, Yolk regains control of Ben's body and climbs a pole. After ripping out the high-tension wires, the alien electrocutes itself. Knowing this is the only way to save the planet, Yolk is destroyed along with the Matrix. Realizing police cars are approaching, B tells the youngsters to run to avoid trouble. He and Patrick take credit for getting rid of the alien. Jan is finally cured of cancer, and weeks later, Nina travels to the United States. Before leaving, she says goodbye to her best friend, and Jan returns home crying. But now, he's got a new chance at life and isn't planning to waste a single minute. And that's the story, folks. What did you think? What would you do if you were infected by Yolk? Drop your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next recap here on the channel.